So for me, it's the same like for Audrey, that I already participated for the first time last year as a teacher in the virtual environmental challenge. The experience was very positive last year, although the Spanish teams in my class did not win in the final. They already created interesting and well-developed projects and showed a generally positive attitude towards this innovative proposal in our university. However, this academic year turned out very differently. So with a few exceptions, yeah, I have to admit it, the students did not seem to be very motivated by the proposed challenge. Some preferred not to participate from the beginning, others attended irregularly, and the results were not as good as the previous year's results. What caused this decline in interest? Were there external or internal factors at play? Was it due to the students' attitudes or the teachers, myself, attitude? So these are some of the questions I wanted to address here today, not only by analyzing the experience with this year's project, from the perspective of motivation, but also by considering how to improve student motivation in the future, both within my own classroom and in other classes or projects. So, of course, yeah, as you know, motivation is an essential concept in relation to any type of education, particularly in language teaching and learning. It can be decisive in the success or failure of learning. As Giotto and Dernier state, motivation provides the primary impetus to initiate second or foreign language learning, and later the driving force to sustain the long and often tedious learning process. So what interests us, or me here, is to understand how to generate or strengthen this motivation in students. So for these authors, there are 3 levels of motivation that can be like exploited at 3 levels. The passion, like finding learners' passion, not necessarily for the foreign language itself, but for a topic that can be addressed in class. Secondly, giving students the opportunity to apply their studies in context outside the classroom, and the active involvement of students in the learning process, finally. So the virtual environmental challenge encompasses all of the mentioned aspects, I think. So project-based learning implies the proactive participation of students who have to develop their own project. Peer teaching implemented within this framework involves interaction with fellow students, often native speakers, in a more relaxed manner than with teachers. And lastly, the proposed topic, the environment, is one of that usually interests students. It was already shown by a lot of scholars. So moreover, the topic is broad enough also for each students to find what interests them the most, from fashion, food, or biodiversity to energy, economy, or education. So it's broad enough, I think, to interest everyone. So then why this relative lack of interest? Motivation is also, as we know, is subject to personal factors like character related and also the attitude of the students. It is difficult to anticipate the passions of, like said these authors, of all students in a university course where the professor generally teaches the same group for only 1 semester. So I didn't know really my students before we started in January. Students who are generally not accustomed to group work may also be demotivated or have difficulty adapting to this type of work. And lastly, we must not forget that often in education, in our case, it was like that, the motivation is the grade, an extrinsic motivation that, while quite effective in the short term, is sometimes insufficient in the long run. So in what follows, I will analyze in more details the specific case of this project in my French language class within the Modern Languages and Literatures degree program in this academic year at the Complutense University. So the first difference compared to the previous year was the lower number of enrolled students. Instead of around 30 students we had last year, there were only 19 at the beginning, but theoretically, because Yes, at the end, I will explain that then. A lot of them did not participate. So it should not be forgotten that these third-year students began their studies in 2020, like 2 years ago, right in the midst of the COVID pandemic, when they could not attend university or only did so rarely. They had virtual classes for the first year. This could have led to a decrease in enrollments or an increase in academic failure or so. It could also indicate a loss of motivation from the beginning of their studies. So out of these 19 enrolled students, 6 never attended class, 3 never showed up and did not explain why. Probably they needed to complete prerequisite courses before taking this one, or I don't know. And 3 provided excuses. One was at Erasmus, one was working, and one was preparing her doctoral thesis. So in the first 2 weeks of the project, 3 other students dropped out due to the work commitments that didn't allow them to balance their schedule, and 1 without providing an explanation. So therefore, only 10 students remained from the 19 right in the beginning. It is evident that there has been a considerable decrease in project participation, although initially none or almost none of the dropouts were due to the lack of interest in the project, because those who did not justify their absence never attended actually, so they didn't even know what we were doing. So I don't think it was due to the project or the class. It is quite clear that on the other hand, it is quite did not provide sufficient motivation for attending the class. Unfortunately, the students who did not participate in the project did not respond to my evaluation questionnaire despite my repeated requests. So maybe it's another sign of lack of motivation. But anyway, I could speak with some of them. So and I have my own impressions too. So and also based on the questionnaire filled out by those who did participate, it is clear that the main reason for the lack of motivation was the low weight of the project in terms of grading. When asked if they felt their efforts were adequately rewarded, those who participated, they gave an average rating of, I think it's here, yeah, 4.4. We have only 5 responses, but these are half of them, so half of those who participated. In the comments, several of them also mentioned this point, that perhaps increasing the percentage of the grades allocated to the project work because there's a lot of work beyond the final presentation. So indeed, I am aware that the project had too little weight in the evaluation, so only 10% of the course, which is only 0.6 credits. I had my doubts when designing the course, but at the end I decided to do it this way for 2 reasons. First, because last year I didn't give much more weight to the project either, and there were no complaints. It worked very well. And second, because our French course coordination imposes 65% for exams, 5% for attendance, and only 30% for continuous evaluation. And if I were to allocate the entire 30% of to the project, which would be fairer, almost 2 credits, the student might have lost interest in the other activities I planned. After all, the project only lasts 6 or 8 weeks, 1 hour per week, while I have 4 hours per week for 14 weeks. So I needed to give grades for other activities too. Furthermore, not only did I decrease the percentage, but as I explained, there were fewer students and more groups this time, based on the experience from last year, because last year I thought that they were too much, they were 3 groups and they were almost 30 students. So there were those who really participated, maybe they were 8 or 9 students per group. So I thought it was too much. And this year we decided to do 4 groups before I knew the number of students who would participate. So at the end, there were only 2 or 3 students per group this year, and it increased, of course, the workload considerably. Finally, another issue was the heterogeneity of the group. While the majority of students were majoring in modern languages with French, there were several students from other majors, such as linguistics. This didn't necessarily mean a lower level, but it could have led to the lack of interest or less engagement in this particular course. At least that's what one of the students who participate in the project seems to suggest. She said, or he said, I think that group work makes it very complex and ineffective because we come from different majors, and many of us may not have the desire to participate or the ability to learn on our own. Now, before attempting to propose some possible solutions, it is interesting to observe the other comments from the students who participated in the project. We can see that although the students were generally satisfied with the project, one of them was not satisfied at all. But what may interest us most is the students' motivation. I also asked them what motivated them, and clearly the dissatisfied student was slightly motivated by the grade only. However, the rest of the students found various motivations, with the exchange with foreign students being the most voted option. The other items received equal votes, improving their French, working with digital tools and the environment, while teamwork was the least favored option. In the comment, there is even a request for more exchanges. They said, yeah, a more direct exchange with members of the other foreign teams would help us get to know each other better and participate more effectively. I believe this is a very interesting result, confirmed in class as well, that the intercultural aspect of the project worked best this year. Only one person once again expressed dissatisfaction with their teachers. They said that the French did not help us. They just asked us to change, but treated us like school children and only judged our assignments. This last negative point is also interesting to note, as another comment expressed a similar sentiment. I think the project would be interesting for high school students, but not at all for university students. I found that interesting. It seems that students somehow associate projects with school, perhaps because this generation has already been able to do similar projects in their schools. They believe that university education should follow a more traditional approach. Or I don't know. What conclusions can we draw from this survey, considering that the sample size is small? Yes, of course, and likely reflects the case of this particular class. So it's though it may not hold true for other groups. First, we must emphasize the importance of exchange and interculturality. In this regard, I think Karen's proposal was very accurate. This conversation with Cyril Dion is very interesting, even though, yeah, our students couldn't really participate because it was outside. I mean, it was in the afternoon for us. But I think like events like this are necessary. However, I believe we could go even further, although we have previously rejected multinational teams due to organizational issues. I think based on these surveys, it could be highly positive. If the sessions are held outside of the class hours as homework or continuous work, it could be done. And secondly, if the students do not know each other well and have never worked in teams during their studies, or if they have only done so when they were younger, it may be necessary to begin with activities that help them feel more comfortable with one another. It is important to provide them with more detailed explanations of what the project entails, why it is valuable, and how they can learn from it. It could also be beneficial to give them more freedom to organize themselves and propose topics, methods, and resources. In this sense, the third point, I believe more students could be involved in the sessions. More students could be involved if the sessions are held outside of class hours, in our case at least. Unfortunately, many students are obligated to work, and since our class is also the first one in the morning, so it was only very early, many of them do not attend for various reasons. If they can organize their own schedule, there could be greater participation, maybe. Fourth, although the survey does not indicate much importance given to the project topic, it can still be a significant factor. While I did emphasize the topic of ecology in class, I did not want the entire course to revolve around it. I have previously experimented with this approach, and while it seemed to work very well, there is a risk, I think, of overwhelming students or even generating rejections if you only speak about ecology. But somehow you have to, or I have to, or we have to find this balance, how to structure the class, how to integrate this project in in this in the class that also could I don't know, have other activities related to the ecology, for example, or race or gender. Finally, we must not forget the extrinsic motivation of evaluation, however prosaic it may be. It is important to recognize that many students are primarily interested in passing or achieving a good grade, and we as instructors must reward efforts in proportion to the work done. If I were to teach the same course again, which I won't, unfortunately, next year, I would allocate 30% of the grade to the project and probably and consider it as a continuous work outside of class. So, although it is possible that next year we will have a completely different group with their own problems, interests, and passions, and no matter what we do, ultimately the success of the project, like in any form of education, depends also on the students. However, as Dernier states, teachers can do a lot to bring forth those passions and interests through motivational strategies, like creating basic motivational conditions, no? At the beginning of the class, generating initial motivation through introductory activities, maintaining then motivation throughout the project with tutorials, partial presentations, in-class preparations, like Audrey told us. And finally, implementing motivating assessments that are not only based on competition results. So thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, it's a little bibliography, and thank you for your attention.